This is the MG5, but not as we know it. For one thing, it's suddenly got more expensive. But is it worth paying the extra for? Well, before I tell you, do make sure you click on that little subscribe button, because if you're into electric cars, this is the place to be. Now, if like me, you liked the idea of the pure electric MG5, but found it a bit, how can I say this kindly, a bit practical looking in the nice but dull category, then I think I have found the answer. Ta-da! And this car does really excite me, probably more than it should. But look, the thing is, this version was a really good car, particularly in long range form. But sadly, it is wrapped up in a body that looks like it's been styled a decade ago by several different people who didn't like each other or actually work in the same place. So what are your first impressions of the MG5's glow up? Let us know in the comments below. So we're here on the UK launch of this new version of the MG5. I only have a couple of hours to show you around it, so we better get going. And I'm going to start with what was mine and many other people's biggest bugbear about this car, the way it looks. Look, as I said, this car really was best described as being functional. It was definitely not a car you would buy because it was stylish. So what have we got this time? Well, take a look. You've still got quite a high riding estate car with 5 seats and a bit of a dull profile from the side on, but there are some very nice new alloy wheels, which I do like a lot. And at least, folks, it's not another SUV, because we just don't need any more of those. But I think the really big news comes at either end. In line with the company's new MG4 hatchback, the MG5 now finally looks like somebody has bothered to style it. And I think it's been pretty successful.
The front has got these new LED headlights as standard, and gone is that fake front grille. Instead, we get a clean-shaven front with this little bar running between the front lights that houses the sensors for the advanced driver assistance systems, broken up by a charging port in the centre.
One of my big gripes about the old MG5 was this, the charging port. It's so wobbly and cheap feeling. But look at the new improved version. Wow. Not so much wobble on that. Feels so much better quality. It's all in the details, folks.
There's also a nice strong line down here and some triangular vents on the side which echo the crisp slashes on the front. It's a lot more pointy than before and is quite frankly leagues ahead of the old car.
So the same story goes for the rear end, where there are new LED tail lights and a new rear bumper with the same treatment as the front. Look, it's not a revolution, but my goodness, it makes such a difference. As I said though, do let us know what you think in the comments below. Are these changes enough to make you look twice? And if they are not, then the changes in here will definitely make you look twice. I mean, this is where you spend most of your time, isn't it? A decent interior is absolutely key for me. And yes, there have been big things going on in here. But it just looks so much nicer than the outgoing version. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. What strikes me immediately is that it just feels brighter and lighter and more modern and more interesting and better quality. I could go on and on there, really. It's a lot better. It's a much nicer place to be. So, what do you get? Well, you've got this 10 and a bit inch touchscreen with updated software, which means you can now, ta-da, use the MG smartphone app, finally. That means that you can check your vehicle status, schedule charging remotely. In my eyes, quite apart from the quality of the interior, that in itself is a proper upgrade. The last car didn't have any app connections at all, which I always thought was a big oversight. It just meant that you couldn't do those basic things like check your charging status or set the cabin to be warm on a cold winter's morning, which is absolutely essential in my book. One slight bugbear is with the climate control. If you remember in the old version, there used to be big physical buttons down there. And there are these shortcut buttons here, which you can press, which take you to it. But it does mean that you've got to go into the menu to do things like change the temperature, which is a bit of an irritation when you're driving. Anyway, apart from that, as I've said, it just feels nicer in here, better materials, nicer textures. It all adds to this perceived sense of quality that the old version didn't have. So this two-tier centre console is a plus. I like the gear selector and the handbrake here. You've got a couple of good-sized cup holders. And then if you just look down here, you've got this great lower area, which makes the most of all the space and is really handy. Look, it's not the sexiest of cabins, but goodness me, this is a giant leap forward for an MG, and it's a much nicer place to be.
As for the rest, well, it's pretty much as it was before. There's space for 5, but the back seats aren't as spacious as you might hope, partly because the floor is quite high as a result of the battery pack underneath. And though the boot is a very useful size, the back seats don't fold flat, which drives me mad. They do squish down a bit if you have something heavy on them, but this is going to make trips to IKEA and shoving the kids' bikes in the back a little bit more fraught. There's only one battery available at the moment for the MG5, and that has 57 kilowatt hours of usable energy. Pretty good for a possible range of just under 250 miles on the official tests. So I'm thinking more like 200 miles in the real world, which is a perfectly practical amount. But one of the things that is a bit disappointing is charging. With only 7.4 kilowatt AC and 87 kilowatt DC fast charging, if you are out and about, the MG won't be the quickest at the charging stop. You're looking at 42 minutes to charge from 10 to 80% on a big charger, whereas most cars can manage that in around half an hour these days. On the average wall box at home, that will take you about 9.25 hours. Obviously, that's not too much of a problem if you do most of your charging at home where it's cheapest, but I do find that perky charging speeds are really useful if you're regularly doing longer journeys. I also know that about half of all MG5s are used as company cars. The guy who came to fit our new charger turned up in one, for example. And they were telling me that they like to plug in back at the depot where they have 3-phase supply of up to 22 kilowatts. So that maximum 7.2 kilowatt hour speed is going to slow things down.
Despite looking really different, the MG5 hasn't massively changed under the skin, which isn't a problem because the driving was its strong point. So you've got the same 154 brake horsepower motor driving the front wheels. And whilst you'd never mistake this car for being sporty, it does feel quick enough. Interestingly, although the motor is the same, there have been some tweaks to the way it delivers power. So the MG5 version 2 is actually quite a bit quicker than before. So dropping that time from just under 9 seconds to 7.7 might not sound like a lot, but you definitely notice it when you're behind the wheel. If I get my foot down here, it really picks up quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually a bit faster than MG claim. I'm not entirely sure that the ride quality is actually as good as the ride on the previous version. Whether that's to do with the wheels or the fact that it's just been tweaked a little, I'm not sure. But it just feels a bit more bouncy than I remember. I'm not on the greatest of roads. I'm on some, pretty bumpy country roads, and I am really feeling every bump and judder that I go across in a way that I don't remember doing in the previous version.
So having given it a bit of thought, my money is definitely on the tyres for that deterioration in the ride quality. So the car that I was driving is a top of the range trophy, and it has 17-inch wheels. So the old car and the lesser SE version have 16-inch. So this means you get an inch less squishiness in the tyres, which sharpens up the steering feel, but does mean that you get more of that fidgety feeling. I do remember the old MG5 feeling very refined and absorbing nasty bumps beautifully. And as I said, this version just doesn't seem to do that as well. Look, none of it is terrible, but I do suspect the less expensive SE will be a nicer car to drive, if not quite as bling, and we will let you know when we try it.
So a couple of things that I picked up from this very quick first drive. First up, it's pretty noisy in here. Look, I know it's difficult, isn't it? Electric cars, of course, they're quiet, so you are more aware of external noises. But there's just a bit more going on in here than I would like. Very conscious of road noise being kicked up from underneath. And it's quite windy today, and I can really hear that buffeting around the car as well. I'd like it to have a bit more refinement. The other thing that disappoints me is the brake regeneration. So this is a feature about electric cars that I really love. When you brake and slow down, you naturally use energy, and what regen does is recuperates that, helps you reuse it. And there's a little toggle down here that allows you to switch through different levels of brake regen, and I've just moved up into level 3 now, the maximum. It's not that impressive. actually. It's quite sedate. I'm using it to slow down now, and it's quite a gradual slowdown. I prefer my brake regen a bit more aggressive, a bit more grabby. Can't really see the point of it being so gentle. But I don't know, maybe that's just me. What do you think? Are you a full-on grabby brake regen fan like me, or do you prefer a more sedate approach? Do let us know in the comments below. One thing I keep thinking as I'm pottering about with this car is that nothing feels particularly cheap, which is actually pretty surprising given the price. And of course that is always the key thing about an MG.
Now the SE comes in at £30,995, which is £1,300 more than the previous model. It does still seem like pretty good value to me though. That extra cash buys you a few upgrades compared to the old car. Things like LED lights front and rear, lumbar support, a clever vehicle to load system, that iSMART connected car app, roof bars and the all-new interior, together with a 500 kilogram towing capacity. And the old car couldn't tow at all. And yes, those roof rails will take a 75 kilogram load, so they're not just for show. Step up to the £33,495 trophy and you get those new 17-inch alloys, leatherette upholstery, heated seats, auto wipers, a 360-degree camera for parking and a few other extras too.
So this is obviously our first go in the MG5 on UK roads, but I have to say, as facelifts go, this is a properly successful effort. It's made a big difference. It's now distinctive enough to have some style. It's got a much nicer and far more practical interior and some added functions that I think really do help, particularly the fact that you have an app and you can do things remotely. MG have addressed some of the complaints from the first version, so it's nice to know that people are actually listening. Look, it does cost a little bit more, but I think most owners would agree that the extra kit is worth it. Look, it's not got the best charging ability on the market, but it is extremely well priced, particularly when you add in MG's 7-year warranty, which makes it a bit of a winner. They also, wait for it, have a decent supply. You probably won't have to wait longer than a few weeks to get one of these at the moment. MG's march towards greatness continues, and I reckon this one is leading the pack.
So now you've got the lowdown on the new MG5, why not check out the MG ZS? Or maybe you could save some cash. How about the MG4? Give that video a look too. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and switch your notifications on, because if you are into electric cars, this is the place to be.